Laity Lodge presents Reflections at Laity Lodge with Frederick Buechner. A critically acclaimed and widely read author of more than 20 books, Frederick Buechner has been honored by the American Academy and Institute of Arts and Letters and nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. Here he shares with us his observations as a novelist and a theologian. In Art and Design, Fred discusses the tension of being a novelist and a minister, and presents a deeply personal sharing of the struggles of life amidst our desire to fulfill our life's work.
What I want to talk about this morning, as Howard has already said, and with apologies to those who have already heard me do this before, is art and religion, these two expressions of the human spirit. And it's a very grandiose title to have to deal with those two vast areas in 45 minutes of a Texas morning. But it's not a grandiose lecture at all. It's a very simple one, and it grows out of my own experience as one who has a foot in both of those camps. The dilemma occurs often as I move around the world and you meet strangers, and after names are exchanged, the question is asked to be, what do you do? And my answer is always, I'm a minister. And then they say, where is your church? And I say, well, I don't have a church, and they look quite uncomfortable. And they say, what do you do? And I say, I write books. And then you can see them edging for the door. It's an awkwardness. Ministers are supposed to have churches, and writers are supposed to write books, and life is complicated enough as it is without confusing those two. But nonetheless, I have, for the last, heaven only knows how many years, 40-odd, been involved in both of those areas. And there is a sort of awkwardness still for me. I remember when I first went to Union Seminary, absolutely to my surprise that I should have done any such thing as that, I figured on fire with this new faith for me. I decided that if I was going to give myself in some sense to Christ, it meant giving everything, including writing. I was writing a book, and I thought, I can't do that anymore. I'm going to have to study and become a minister and do whatever ministers do. And I did sort of set it aside. And when I was originally ordained, I took a job as a teacher and chaplain in Exeter and so on, and put writing away. But then I decided that maybe that wasn't necessary. That decision wasn't one that was being laid upon me, that maybe what I should give to Christ as my life was my writing. Why wasn't that just as legitimate a way to be a Christian as any other? And I believe that still, although always with a sense of maybe I should have done something else. Maybe I should have manned the barricades. Maybe I should have had another kind of ministry. But this is what I've done. And when I appear before St. Peter's Gate, if I get that far, and he says, Freddie, what did you do with your life? My answer will have to be simply, I wrote books. That's what I did with my life, professionally anyway. I didn't march in Selma. I have never visited the sick and the imprisoned and the hungry, except those who happened to cross my path and those I loved. I've never done any of those sort of churchly Christian things. I've simply written books, and that's it. I stand or fall by that. But I think that art and religion, different as they seem in some ways, and awkward as the sort of yoking of them occasionally seems even to me, maybe a minister should be ministering in some other way, they have a lot of things in common, one thing in particular, the artist and the religious person. And that's what I want to talk about, what it is I think they have in common. And I want to say a little something about three of the arts, beginning with writing, which is the one that, for better or for worse, I've spent my life at. Just as a ophthalmic surgeon operates on eyes, and a dentist fills teeth, and a carpenter builds houses, I move words around the page. That's what I spend my life doing. Trying to find the right one, trying to put it in the right place, trying to make it sound fresh and new. And the more I deal with words, the more I'm astonished and mystified by the great power they have. These little squiggles you write on a piece of paper, these sounds you make with your tongue, your teeth, the power they have as words. And it seems to me, thinking about it, that they have four powers particularly. One is the power to be beautiful, simply to be beautiful. I'm struck by that again and again, as I'm sure everybody is. You think of poetry, of course. somebody like Gerard Manley Hopkins, the great 19th century Jesuit poet, whom I think I love more than any other poet, describing in a poem called The Windhover, you remember it, which he dedicates to Christ the Lord, the action of the bird in the sky, where he says, I caught this morning morning's minion, kingdom of daylight's dauphin, dapple, dawn-drawn falcon in his riding of the rolling level steady underneath him air. Or Shakespeare in his middle age writing, how that time of year thou mayst in me behold, where yellow leaves, or none, or few, do hang upon these boughs which shake against the cold, bare ruined choirs where late the sweet birds sang. And quite apart from what they mean, who even cares altogether what they mean? The music of them, the sadness of them, the shimmer of them. That's a lot of what words can do. Simply to be beautiful and to put us in touch with a kind of beauty, which is within the reach of all of us. We all use words. In addition to meaning things, conveying meaning, and I was so aware of this. We just come back from this lengthy, expensive, God help us, trip to Europe. How wonderful words mean something, and how helpless you are when you travel through a country where you really don't know the language and you can't express the simplest meaning, like where is the John? But in addition to meaning, of course, they can imply meaning. They imply, they echo, they suggest meaning beneath the reach of simply sort of dictionary definition. And that's what, of course, literature does, to imply meanings through stories, through poems, meaning that can't really be expressed directly in any other way. And you can all think of writers who seem to do that, particularly for you. One writer whom I came to late but have come to love is Flannery O'Connor. I hope you've all read her. Have you all read hers? Most everybody? And her short stories, where she implies so much more than she says. And one of the great short stories is one called Revelation. You remember that one? It takes place in a doctor's waiting room. And there's a sort of fat, pimply, unattractive girl, and there's a dreadful, pious old woman, and a few other people. And the old pious lady is talking on insufferably about how lucky she is that God made her white and not black. Black people are all right, but better to be white than be black, and all sorts of things like that. And finally, the fat girl can't take it anymore, and she picks up a book and wings at the old gal and catches her in the side of her head. And calls her, she says, you old warthog from hell. And this really rocks the old gal back in her feet. And it leads to a series of revelations, hence the title, the last one of which is at sunset. She's been feeding her. She happens to have pigs, so when the unattractive girl calls her an old warthog, she knows what that means. And she's sort of hosing down the pig pen, and she looks up when the sun is setting, and she imagines walking up one of those sunbeams, the saints marching in, and the blacks lead the procession, and then this people, that people. And the very end of the procession are people like her, the pious ones. And she says her revelation is, in the last analysis, in order to enter the kingdom, even our virtues will have to be burned away. Because she's a virtuous woman in many ways. And that's such a revelation. That implies so much, not just about the old woman, I think, but about everybody. Even in the last analysis, even our virtues will have to be burned away. So the power of words, not just to mean, but also to imply meaning that really can't be expressed directly, but can only be conveyed through stories, through whatever form you choose as a writer. And they also, of course, have the power, maybe almost the most basic power, I suspect sometimes, to tell stories, the power of words to narrate. I don't know how language began. Nobody really knows that. There's many theories about it, but I have a feeling that one of the ways that they began were just the caveman coming back from an adventure and wanting to say what happened. So he says, I got out of my cave and I picked up a stone, and along came a dinosaur, and I threw it, and it hit him in the side of the head, just like the old woman with the book, and this happened and that happened, and all the other cavemen and women are leaning forward to hear. There's something about the narration. What happened next, and then what happened, and then what happened, as if the progress of the story takes us not only into the story, but somehow into our own story. And what happened to us, what happened next, what happened. that is a great gift that certain writers have. I think of my beloved Anthony Trollope, who doesn't dazzle you with his style or usually does not overwhelm you with any emotion particularly, but simply tells these marvelous tales about the inhabitants of Barset or whatever else. I think of the great Texan Larry McMurtry, whom I come to admire more and more. Lonesome Dove, that wonderful book, where I simply couldn't stop. I'm not a Texan, I'm not interested in cattle drives and that sort of thing, but the lure of the narrative. What happened? And then there was the river and the snakes, and the boy got killed, and then there was a snowstorm, and then there was this and that and the other. And I'm caught up in a sort of enchantment. So words with that power, the power to narrate, to take us out of our own stories, to put it another way, and into another story, the wonderful vacation of that, to get out of my story into somebody else's, into Bishop Prouty's. And then the power of words to move us, which is one of the deepest forms of their magic, I think. I can't read King Lear, and I've read it countless times, without being moved, if not to literal tears, to inward tears by that play. And written, whenever it was written, 390 years ago or something like that. Old Lear and the heath and that awful storm, which is a reflection of the terrible storm that is going on within him as he realizes that he's been an old fool for the last X years and has banished the wrong daughter and embraced the ones who are really the ones who are his enemies. And in the midst of that rainstorm, suddenly this revelation about those who have endured rain for all the years that he's been king. And he says that kind of prayer, remember, poor naked wretches, wheresoe'er you be that bide the pelting of this pitiless storm, how shall your houseless heads and unfed sides defend you against seasons such as these? Oh, I have taken too little care of this. Take physic, pomp. Expose thyself to feel what wretches feel, that thou mayst shake the superflux to them and show the heavens more just. And that's so touching, and it's so true, and it's so moving in the sense of moving you in the direction of, if not tears, a sort of inward sorrow. All the poor naked wretches of whom we have, all of us, taken too little care. And the power, another way of saying it would be the power that words have to make us laugh. Jokes cracked 300 years ago, which can make you laugh today. Wonderful gift. Mark Twain, one of my favorites, and one of his travel books, perhaps Innocents Abroad, where this is again comes out of my recent European trip. Mark Twain realized that one way to drive any museum guide absolutely crazy is to ask one question, which is he dead? The guide shows you a bust of Christopher Columbus or a portrait of Gregory the Great, and you simply say, is he dead? And of course the guide goes crazy, dead! Oh, God. So, words which have the power then to move us to tears, to move us to laughter, even though centuries have gone by, the spark seems to be able to jump from writer to reader, no matter how many centuries have intervened, no matter how many translations have occurred between the original language and the one in which you read it. So, words, their power, those powers. But it seems to me they have a even more basic power than that, which is what I'm getting at. And to illustrate what I mean, I wanted to recite for you one of those little Japanese haiku. You remember the 17-syllable Japanese poems that became very fashionable over here at the time that Zen Buddhism became fashionable. When I was teaching at Exeter, sort of in the 60s, everybody was reading about Zen.